Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Fletcher Grove Girls Center of Excellence's webinar series. Today's webinar presenters are Alan Muia, Executive Director with New Earth Recovery, and Carmin Long, Executive Director with Truly Motivated Transitional Living. Before starting New Earth Recovery with his wife, Amy, Alan worked for 18 years in higher education at Seattle Pacific University and at Skagit Valley College, where he served as Dean of Student Services. He holds a master's degree in educational psychology and has participated in numerous local, state, and national leadership development programs. He co-founded and currently chairs the board of Washington Alliance for Quality Recovery Residences. His professional interests include recovery science, conflict resolution, and staff development. Carmin Long is the co-founder and executive director of Truly Motivated Transitional Living. She is a certified Genesis relapse prevention counselor and is a person in long-term recovery and has lived experience in recovery residences. Carmin is a founding member and vice chair of the Washington Alliance for Recovery Residences. Carmin was also the recipient of the Washington Department of Corrections Citizen of the Year Award in 2008 and the Phoenix Award from Behavioral Health Resources in 2007. Alan, Carmin, the floor is yours.
Hi, and welcome. We're really glad to be here with all of you today. I think most of the intro was well put for me. And yeah, I've been doing recovery home operating since 2005. And we have 3 homes for men and women here in Yelm, Washington. And we are a faith-based staffed year-long program for folks. And we just invest in them and walk alongside them in all the twists and turns of life and early recovery.
Everyone, I'm Alan, as you heard in the introduction, and I am the director of New Earth Recovery. We operate 8 homes for men and women here about an hour north of Seattle. And we just opened our first level 1 home. So we have homes at 3 different levels of care and have been at this for about 15 years now and continue to learn as we go. And this topic we want to talk about today is near and dear to both of our hearts and something that we continue to kind of learn about and get better at. And, like any learning, you typically learn from mistakes. And so that's certainly no exceptions here, that we've learned some of this content through some really difficult times. And then we've seen some really amazing things happen as we've applied what we've learned. So really anxious to share this stuff with you and looking forward to see how it affects the work that you do.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. So this whole idea of what we're talking about today is just this idea of being able to work through and work with folks as we're seeing problematic behaviors with people in our homes. And just this idea that we should really expect these things to happen, that we should not be surprised when these things happen. Most of us are probably aware that the average age of starting to use substances is around 12. And so that whole growing up time that people would typically be procuring life skills and relationship skills hasn't been happening, and survival has been happening for folks. So they don't have that skill set when people are entering into our homes, and that we as operators really should be expecting and also be equipped to help folks as they're working through these different challenging behaviors. Again, just the skill set that is needed to survive an addiction is far different than what it takes to live in community and to be successful in community, which is what people are doing when they're in our homes. But not just as people are in our homes, but when they leave and go on from our homes, that skill set that's needed to do life and to do life well. We can go to the next slide.
I think we just clicked through. We've got a couple more clicks there. There we go. And then one more slide.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So we want to talk a little bit about what the alternatives are to removing a resident from our homes. I think the temptation is to say, well, this person we use language like, well, they're just not ready, or they don't get it yet, or they haven't hit bottom, or all kinds of kind of rationale that we use to say that a person just isn't going to be a good fit for our homes. And I think what we want to challenge you with today is not to give up so soon, and that there are some reasons why it's important to maybe give folks another chance and give them some more tools and so on. So we really want to focus in on a little bit in this section about why we would do that. So why would we seek alternatives to removing people? First of all, being allowed to stay in a recovery residence may save someone's life. I don't think I need to spend too much time on this one, but I think it basically boils down to the fact that it's just dangerous out there. And I don't know how many of you have been through this experience, but we have, when we've asked residents to leave because it just has not been a fit and we've tried everything we can, or they return to use and leave. We've had residents lose their lives. And so this is really a life and death endeavor. Second thing I want to say is that living in a recovery residence requires people to have experiences that lead to limbic retraining. And I do want to do just the briefest bit of brain science here. And that is to say that we really have two parts of our brain. There's this logical center, and in our logical brains, it's where we make decisions, it's where we make plans, it's where we literally do the math, it's where we say, well, this course of action would be better for me than this course of action. But the other part of our brain is our survival brain, or our limbic brain, or you maybe heard it said called our lizard brain. In our lizard brain, or our survival brain, is much more basic. It's instinct. It is much stronger and faster than our rational brain. And it is where, you probably know where I'm going with this, it's where addiction lives. It's about the belief of the person who's in addiction is that if I don't use, I'll die. At some basic level, there's this sort of set of kind of life skills, we'll call them, or strategies that a person learns when they're living in their limbic brain that is all about survival. And there's not a lot of nuance to those things. So when they come to our homes, they've got to learn a whole different way of living, not just kind of life skill kind of stuff, but which we'll talk about, but also just how do I survive now? And what does survival, or can I live life beyond surviving? So we know that when a person is trying to learn something rationally, they can be taught. You can sit them in a classroom and you can talk about that this kind of behavior is good for you and this kind of behavior is bad for you. And they can take that in on a rational level. But on a limbic level, which is what happens in that survival part of our brain, the only way that people learn is through experience. And so we sort of run these laboratories where they get to have experiences of not getting along with somebody or not agreeing with somebody and needing to find a different way to deal with that than the way they used to deal with it, which would be to fight or to flee. And so our homes offer these sort of places where people can have experiences. And that's why the research tells us that the longer a person can stay in a healthy recovery residence environment, the more likely they're going to be to stay in long-term recovery. And that's because they keep learning limbic lessons over and over again. And when something goes well in a limbic kind of learning space, then we learn to do more of it. And so that's how people kind of make it work. So we're literally helping them reprogram themselves in our environments. And if they don't stay long enough to have those limbic experiences, none of that stuff can happen. I went a little bit long there, Carmen. Sorry. I get a little bit carried away on that topic.
You queued me up for my next one. If we want to just give one more little click here. There we go. So the other reason to not have people go is for them to start having a new experience. And Alan was just talking about those limbic experiences of when something goes wrong, of the story not just ending right there, right? So the men and women that we have coming into our homes are very used to punitive consequences, rejection, abandonment, all the things that go wrong when behaviors are not as they should be, and a lot of failures in their story. How many times did the story end, or I had to leave, or the relationship stopped, or I lost this, or this bad thing happened? And so when we are giving people opportunity to work through issues in our home and modeling grace and accountability and competence, we're helping them add to their successes, maybe sometimes for the first time in their whole life. And so I am guessing that most of you are starting to gather that this is really, really profound, foundational new learning for people. And as Alan talked about, that limbic retraining is the most powerful thing. And the longer I've been doing this, the more I'm convinced it's the most powerful thing that can happen for folks when they're on their recovery journey, is to have that limbic retraining of having a new positive experience in an old wounded place is incredibly impactful, and it really changes everything. And we've watched it happen time and time again. The other thing it does is it helps us to deinstitutionalize people and get beyond the black and white thinking And so we're all probably very familiar with what institutionalization looks like, is that it's punitive, it's very black and white. And what we don't want is for people to come into our homes and to kind of show up good for us. And so I can look good, I can pass your rules, I'll do the things that you're asking me to, but I'm really only doing that because I don't want to lose my place to live. That is not the kind of change. It's actually not really change at all. It's just knowing how to do the right thing and say the right thing to be able to get by. And so what we're after is that deeper level of change, is when people can show up with all of their behaviors and all the deficits and all the different things that come along with going from addiction into recovery. We want them to bring those into our homes and then show them a better way, right? And show them that you can still screw up here, but we're going to come alongside you and we're going to teach you how to handle that better on the next go and the next go and the next go. And what happens is people start to have a deeper level of change that's not surface, that's on a deeper heart level. And those are the kind of changes that go with people when they go from us. And so we've watched it happen time and time again in our homes when people are expecting the worst thing to happen because they lied or they gave a dirty UA or they are not doing well in the home. And when something good happens, like Alan was talking about that limbic retraining, when they're expecting to get something punitive and something, negative to happen in that situation and something good happens, trust starts to be rebuilt, which is another foundational part of recovery, is learning to trust again. They start to trust us as operators. They start to learn to trust themselves a little bit more and settle down into the space that they're in. And I think that's really where that deep healing starts to happen for folks. We can go to the next.
Yeah, we used to love those residents who were just pleasers, because they kind of stayed under the radar and they seemed to do fine. They did everything we asked, and we thought, wow, this person's recovering really well. But that wasn't it. They were institutionalized and they just knew how to work the system. And I don't blame anybody for that. That's a coping skill. But we weren't getting the real authentic person who was really getting into that kind of life, that life change that Carmen's talking about. So the final thing I want to say on this topic is that that again, aside from limbic learning and moving away from kind of black and white thinking, deinstitutionalizing, there are some basic life skills that we have the opportunity to work with folks on that they're not going to get in other places as intentionally as they can get them from us. And there are things like how to navigate conflict, which we've talked about already. We'll talk about it again, I'm sure. Apology and forgiveness. How does that work? Working through resentments. Any of you folks who are 12-step graduates or in the 12 steps now, that resentments and actually doing that work is a skill. It's not something that comes easily to any of us. Increasing in confidence, growing in self-esteem, all of those pieces that just happen through, again, experience after experience. And nobody was born with those skills. Those are hard, those are soft skills, they're called, but they're hard skills, and that they're hard to learn and they take real effort to develop some of those things. Some of them are just, oh, I could say that in this kind of situation, real basic kind of stuff like that. All right, let's go to the next slide.
We want to talk a little bit about trying to discern the difference between what is a behavioral issue and what may be a mental health concern, and kind of trying to find the difference between those two. And for all of us as operators, we know that we want to stay in our own lanes, that we're not mental health professionals, but that does not mean that we don't need to be versed in some awareness and understanding of what mental health issues look like. I'm sure most of you who are working in this field are well acquainted with this. So we do need to be informed and have that trauma-informed care lens and all these different things. But we also need to know what the difference is when it comes down to, can we work with somebody to, change a behavior? And are we doing those things? And are we not maybe seeing the results that we would hope to have? And oftentimes that can be because of a mental health challenge where they just may not be able to do that. Even with the best interventions and the competencies and the different helps that we can give, they may not just be able to come around to that. So we also need to know when it may be necessary to outsource with folks a little bit. Do they need to go get a mental health diagnosis that they haven't had before? Is it something that we're noticing that they're not able to come around to some of the helps that we're offering Do they maybe need to go to a mental health stabilization for a period of time and then come back to the house? And so knowing when to outsource is really, really important for us. And so we can click and go to the next one here.
And the challenge there is that mental health or mental illness and addiction just go hand in hand. And so there's so many chicken and egg propositions, right? Where maybe using behavior is sort of self-medicating for a mental health challenge. The other way around is the longer a person uses, the more likely they are to develop some mental health challenges, especially ones that just come about as a result of kind of increased trauma in a person's story. And if they use long enough, they're going to have more of that. And obviously we know that brain chemistry changes when someone's using substances, and we don't know which causes which all the time. We also know that we get strange diagnoses for people. They get when someone is using meth and then they go use an opiate, their behavior looks a lot like manic depressive disorder. And how we find is people kind of come out of their mental health challenge because medication's working, then maybe some of those things that they actually have the language we use, they actually have a fair fight at their addiction because they actually can sort of isolate those things. So another thing that we look at is about something might be a mental health challenge is if in kind of normal situations or normal circumstances, somebody who goes through a stressful situation that really elevates them and that kind of cranks them up, that that they do have a kind of a cooling down period, and that it doesn't take too long with just some normal kind of de-escalation work to get someone to kind of, de-escalate, to get to a place where they can see things, maybe, again, I'll use limbic brain, logical brain language. They can get out of their limbic brain, out of fight, flight, freeze, and into something that feels a little bit more like logic, and it feels a little bit more congruent with what's really going on. And so someone should be able to do that eventually. And if they can't, if they stay in that kind of wound up spot and just can't seem to click out of that, might be a sign that there's something going on mental health wise that needs to be addressed in another way. Another one is that it might be that a destructive behavior continues. There's this pattern of behavior and it goes on and on and on. And regardless of the interventions, and you can have some really successful interventions where the person gets it again on a rational level. They get that this behavior is destructive. And no matter how many times they go through it and have kind of epiphanies, they continue to click back into that unhealthy mode. So that might be a sign again where, wow, there's something going on here beyond what, a person kind of who's in a normal state of mind will be able to learn from those experiences. Even though they're limbic, they'll learn from them and get to a better place. So there's two things that they would watch out for.
So I wanted just to share a quick little story, kind of an example of this. We had a gal in our home that came to us really straight out of the fire, for literally her entire life was chaos, and she didn't have a whole lot of chance of having any kind of normalcy. Came to us from treatment and really wanted to be in recovery, was probably one of the more willing people that I've seen come through our program in the last 20 years, but really had a hard time in the community setting of the home, and consequently had a lot of altercations with the different ladies in the home. And so we started taking her through our processes and use the self-discovery strategies, which we're going to talk about in a while, use the behavior contract. But in the meantime, I was starting to spend a lot of time with her and was taking her through what we use here, and Alan also uses in his program, the Genesis process. And I started to learn more of her story. And consequently, most of her deepest wounds and biggest hurts came from her mom. And putting two and two together of living in a house full of women was incredibly threatening to her. She wanted to be in community. She wanted to build those relationships, but that limbic brain was just saying, this is bad. This is bad. This is bad, right? And so all those different coping strategies were coming out, but we were willing to walk through the process with her and watched as her limbic brain started to settle down, and watched as she was able to start learning to trust us and start learning to develop relationships with the ladies in the house. And I think that if I hadn't had the window into some of her story, and I just will point out to you the importance and value of knowing your people's stories and knowing where they're coming from and be able to connect their stories with the struggles that they may be having in your home. I would say that if we didn't have those things here and we hadn't spent that time that we had with her, she probably would have been somebody that would have been a candidate maybe in another setting to go, we just have to move on. It's just, she's not the right fit. She's not coming around. The house is in an uproar. People are having issues. There's a constant battle going on. And although she did have mental health challenges and many mental health diagnoses, we were able to kind of see that this was a behavior issue that could be worked through versus a mental health issue that she was not able to come along and be a part of this process. So I think you have to give it some time to go through a process with folks to see how they're going to be able to respond. And if it is just a behavior issue that can be worked through, or if it's a mental health challenge that they just may not be able to come around to that. In saying that, if it does come to the point where it is apparent that this person is not able to come along in this process with us, and you do have to make that decision that this may not be the right fit for this person or for the home, doing that graciously and kindly and appropriately and safely with the person and trying to help them get to the next best thing that's going to work for them is also a part of our responsibility, I believe, as housing operators.
Yeah, so we don't abandon people. We don't just leave them at the curb or kick them. We don't love the language of kicking people out. That just feels, that's exactly what it feels like to people. And if they have been forcibly removed from situations before, we just don't want to be a part of that pattern. We want people to leave well, to the extent that we can have a say in that. That's really, really important, Carmin. That, yeah, I appreciate you said that. So what we're trying to do is, when people have mistakes, how can those be learning opportunities instead of kind of clicks, notches on the chalkboard that are going to lead toward their eviction? So how do we connect with folks in a way that says, and we have this conversation fairly regularly, we are on your side. We want you to succeed here. We want you to stay. And sometimes you have to put that on a little bit, because there's maybe, if we're honest, a little part of us that said, boy, life would be easier if you weren't here. But if you're looking for an easy life, this is not the field for you. But helping people through some of those toughest experiences are what we're about. And maybe the harder the experience, the more difficult it is to work through. If we can help the person win at the other end of that and get to a place where they learn something from that mistake, it's so rewarding when I can reflect with a resident down the road about the crisis that they went through, and we can laugh about it a little bit, not in any kind of way that degrades them, but we can say, they can recognize, wow, that really was, kind of with my new way of looking at life, that really was over the top. And so it's pretty powerful when they can get to a place to sort of see that behavior objectively and see how it wasn't working for them, even though limbically they thought it was. Their survival brain is saying, I got to do this in order to make life work. But actually, life works better when that change happens. We have this choice when we're talking about kind of what we do with a resident, and the choice really is often about the good of the one versus the good of the many. Those of you who are old enough to be kind of original Star Trek fans know that's kind of a classical ethical dilemma, right? Is that I have this person, and if it were just this person, and that were the only person living in the house, I might make a different decision than I would make if I'm setting this person next to all the other folks in the house and how they're impacted by this one person's behavior. So if I could just have the one person, I would keep them longer. But there are times where I have to say, wow, the house is really destabilized and struggling because of our choice to keep this person. And so that question is kind of looms in the background for all of us. And we've even talked about it with our houses before. And we talk about it with our other residents about the environment of the house. And so we say things like, we want this to feel more like a clinic than a courtroom. How can our house be a place where people feel like they're getting help and they're making progress and they're moving forward, instead of the courtroom, which they're very used to? Most of our folks are very used to courtroom settings where all of their wrongs are kind of being put in front of them, and their job is to justify why we should keep them. And that's such a toxic place for people to be, but they're very familiar with it. So we want to switch that script and say, again, we're on your side. We want you to succeed, but we need to be really firm about what that means. So in order for you to stay, we need these things in place, and we need you to agree to do these things. And if you can't do these things, then we've got to have a harder conversation. So all of that to say, all of that's kind of an introduction to this piece about how do we help our residents self-correct so that their problematic behavior we kind of work through it, we get to the other end of it, and then they develop some skills to succeed, not just in our house. We want them to do that, but this is all about what life is going to be like outside of their environment or our environments. So how are they going to make marriage work? How are they going to make employment work? Those other environments all kinds of relationships that they have, if they can learn from their mistakes with us and with our safety net and with the level of grace that we can offer them, then they might be able to succeed much more successfully in other places. So here's just some strategies that we use. First, of course, is de-escalation. I would challenge you, just as a homework assignment, to kind of list the tools that you have in your de-escalation toolbox. And I'll share one or two with you just off the cuff. But what are the things that are set up either in your house or in your houses with your staff? Do your staff know, or do your house managers know some basic steps about how to calm somebody down? Or maybe at very least, how not to make it worse, right? So we all know when someone's agitated or in some sort of crisis, whether it's real or imagined, or a limbic crisis, we'll call it, what we do there, we can make it worse by challenging them, by matching their voice, by creating a scenario where it feels like, pardon my language, but it feels like a pissing match where it's me against you and I'm going to win because I'm in charge here. Where so often that is, and if you've ever found yourself kind of moving in that direction, you know how ineffective it is at actually resolving a situation. It tends to escalate somebody more toward the crisis, and then we have a crisis that might even be violent, and that can be really destructive. A colleague of mine who works in our local jail here says the first thing he does when someone comes in and is kind of freaking out, that's his language, and maybe they're high or maybe not, maybe they're having a mental health crisis or whatever, the first thing he does is he offers them a glass of water. And he just has them sit down with him at his desk and drink the whole glass of water. And that's really it's an amazing strategy. For one, it sort of calms people down. Secondly, there's a pretty good chance that person is dehydrated, and so that means that their nervous system isn't firing correctly, and so they're not able to listen or act according to logic. That their nervous system is not working properly, and the glass of water can be a fix. It also calms things down. It also shows hospitality. All kinds of reasons to just offer someone a glass of water. Just a little tip there. We like to use bookmarks in our conversations with people. So to be able to say, boy, we're not in a really good place right now, or it seems like you're really stressed out right now. Can we talk about this in an hour? Or can we come back to this? Let's get something to eat, and then let's talk about it in a few minutes. So a bookmark is a great de-escalation strategy where we're not avoiding something, we're not avoiding the situation, but timing is everything in trying to resolve escalated situations. And then, of course, just calming presence, right? How can we carry calm with us? How can we, I heard a colleague talk about, how can we be an environment of calm and safety for somebody else? And if I can be an environment and sort of spread that environment out to encompass the person who I'm talking to or connecting with, that can be a huge gift to them so their best selves can come forward instead of this agitated self. All right. Carmen knows I can go on about this, so I will pass it back to her.
Yeah, one thing I would add to that before I hop into self-discovery strategies, another really helpful thing that I have found is when somebody's coming in and they're just kind of freaking out and they're giving you the long laundry list of all the reasons why they're not happy, is I will just take and I'll just be quietly writing down every single different subject that they brought up. Because a lot of times when you get into that setting with somebody, it's easy to lose track of each different thing, I think. And it also is saying that I am paying attention to what you're saying. I wrote it down, and now let's go through line by line and try and take what seems like this big ball of frustration, and let's just talk about each thing together, right? And just had a gal in my office a couple of weeks ago, and she's fairly new and she's upset, and she kind of came in pretty hard and fast, and I could feel myself kind of getting a little bit, you can feel that physical response in your body, and I went, nope. She's just in here voicing her concerns, and that's good, right? We want people to come in and have a conversation about what's bothering them. They may not have the best approach, but they're learning, right? But that safe, calm presence, like Alan was talking about, and also having to kind of check ourselves, like Alan was talking about, of when we feel our own self starting to get frustrated, we really just have to put ourselves in check and go, and I remind our staff all the time, it takes us probably solid 2 to 3 months, maybe longer, for our participants to figure out that we're trustworthy, safe people. They do not know that about us. We know that about us, but they don't know that about us yet. And so everything we do is to try and build that safe, trusting presence with folks. And sometimes just being able to let people unpack or unravel and then go, okay, well, let's talk about the list and let's see where we can get to. So I want to talk about self-discovery strategies. This is a document that Alan and I both use in our programs, and it's really taking a situation where someone, maybe you've had a couple conversations with a particular person about something that's happening in the home. You've had the couple conversations, it may not be working for us, and I believe Alan works the same way. That's when we'll go into moving into a process, right? And what I want to say, and Alan alluded to it earlier, is that when you're entering into these processes with folks, the message that we have to give is that we want you to stay. We want you to be here. We want you to be successful. That's the whole motivation behind what we're doing right now. It's not to gotcha. It's not to have you fill out a bunch of papers, because Lord knows you've probably done that a lot throughout your addiction and disease and recovery and all those different things. This is a process that we care about you, and we really feel like if you'll engage in this with us, it can help, right? And so the self-discovery form is pretty straightforward. And the whole idea is that we're helping people have their own self-discovery on an ongoing issue. And chances are this is a behavior that has been plaguing them and following them around and sabotaging their lives for a very long time. And so instead of us telling people what they need to do to fix themselves, because they're also very used to being in that situation, we're giving them the tools they have the answers inside of them. We're just giving them a way to walk through and come up with some of their own answers and own their own answers and own their solutions, right? And so the form is very straightforward. It's basically asking them what happened. Can you tell us what happened? It then asks them if they would please name the behavior and the feeling that they were experiencing while the situation was happening. So basically, how did you act and how did you feel in the situation that was happening, or in the behavior that is becoming a problem? The next question is asking them, what did you believe that made this okay? Like, how did you justify what was going on? And so they would fill that out to the best of their ability. And then how does this behavior affect you? And how does this behavior affect others, right? And so this whole idea that none of us are living on an island, we're not autonomous. Everything that happens in the context of relationship and community. So it's not just impacting me, it's gaining an awareness of how this is affecting others, right? And the next question, I think, is really one of the most profound ones on this for people, is how has this affected you in your relationships in the past? And so this is where they get to have a little insight and reflection on how this is something that has probably been following me around for a long time and has caused a lot of issues for me in my life. And I can tell you, if there are people who are really wanting to do better, this is going to be a pretty big aha moment. Like, oh man, this has been causing me problems for a long time, and I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I want to be successful. And so I think when you have this, and you or your staff or whoever is working with your folks saying, yeah, and we want to help you not have to do it again either, like, because we care about you, because your future and your life matter to us as well. And then after you've gone through that part of the form, it's having them just work a double bind on the behavior. So a double bind is I'm stuck in the middle of this. I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't, right? If I do change, something scary is going to happen. If I don't change, I know what's going to happen. And so oftentimes people get stuck in the middle of those situations. And so this is just a little process to walk through to go, what's going to happen? What will I be vulnerable to? What's the scary thing that might happen if I decide to walk away from this behavior, to change it, to do something different? What's the scary, hard thing that I'm going to experience in that process? And then what do I know is going to happen if I don't change this behavior? So you're kind of getting into the two different parts of the brain here. It's very, very impactful. You'll probably need a little bit of help walking through this. And then after that, what's the new plan? What's the new plan? Who can help you with this? Who can hold you accountable? How can we help you with this in your new plan? And lastly, is there anybody that you need to go and make an amends to, right? And so that's that limbic retraining that we talked about earlier, is that acknowledging that I made a mistake And in that, who do I need to go to do some cleanup, right? And so it's this really good life skills training in the process of all of this. And so that self-discovery for us is kind of what starts a process for folks if we're running into the same issue with people. And we tell them, we talked about it a couple of times, it seems like we're still struggling. We're going to now kind of enter into a process with you. The first step is a self-discovery form. It's not just another paper for you to fill out because you have to, but there really is an opportunity to have real change in your life if that's what you're after, right? If that is not effective, then we're probably going to move into a behavior contract, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute. And if that's not effective, then we would probably be starting to move into a last chance form. So we want people to be aware of what's happening in their process with them, and that they have just as much knowledge about what we're doing as that they should, because it's their home, it's their livelihood, it's their recovery. And we don't want them to be coming into a process with us that they're like, wait, what? I didn't know, they need to be informed. And it's the fair and right thing to do. So I know that Fletcher has this document. We sent it to them, and so it'll be available here after the webinar. It's kind of the meat, it's kind of the goodness of working with challenging behaviors.
I stuck it in the chat too, Carmen. So they've
Great.
got it in the chat, this bonus document that she's provided for you all. It's
Okay.
titled Self-Discovery.
Yeah.
Right.
And what I'll say about that before we move on to mediation is that we've seen really significant turnaround with folks when we've engaged in that process with them. And then sometimes we've had to move to the next one. We've had to move into a behavior contract, but the whole time we're telling people the same message. We want you here. We want to help you work through this. We want you to have success. And I think that in all of this is the most important motivation and conversation that we can be having with people, because the men and women that we're serving are very used to being put out, kicked out, shut down, you're done, move on in their lives, right? And so I think just that part piece of saying, we want you to stay, we want you to be here. This doesn't have to be another scenario where the bottom breaks out and things go wrong, right? And that trust is being rebuilt. It's really, really powerful. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Carmen. Such good stuff. We've seen really good results of that as well. So we have in crisis situations, we've de-escalated as best we can. We have maybe had to start a process that starts with this sort of self-discovery mode where we really are giving people in a very concrete way a chance to learn from their experience, from their mistakes, and hopefully a way that's honoring and respectful and not treating people like kids or humiliating them, but really giving them an opportunity to really learn. The next tool in the toolbox then is mediation. So often what will happen in our homes is two people, they just sort of start this conflict and they start going down this road that maybe starts with a simple disagreement, and then it turns into just disappointment with each other, and it just goes down the spiral, and they can get to a place where they can become totally polarized with each other. If you don't know what polarized means, just check out our current political situation in our country, right? That's polarized. So no matter what you say, I'm going to say the opposite just because it's you that's saying this thing. So when you get two residents that get far down the line and that's where they are, that's a really difficult place to come back from. So what we try to do is help people avoid getting that far down and actually try to deal with something while it's still a disagreement that they could work their way through. And the tool that we use to do that is mediation. And there's a real formal kind of form of mediation, but obviously in our homes, it makes sense to have maybe a really dialed down version of it that has some informality to it, but that it has some structure. So in our organization, all of our staff are trained in the mediation process, a real basic kind of model of mediating. And if you haven't done that and you think that there could be some value in doing that and helping your residents kind of work through things together, get some mediation training. Most states have organizations that do that, and it's inexpensive for what you get out of it. It's really good. And then we can help people. The whole point of mediation is to move away from an arbitration model. Arbitration says two people come to me, they disagree about something, and they want me to solve it for them. So I end up being the judge, and they're used to that. They're used to that model. Okay, we're going to go to court. We're going to settle it in court. But what we want them to do is develop the skill set to actually work through their problems themselves and to come up with their own solutions and to negotiate with somebody else through some possible solutions. The only way that's going to happen is if they get practice. And a mediation process is kind of is an organized way in which they can do that, in which basically, if I'm serving as a mediator, I create a safe environment for an important conversation to happen. And people will come to mediation with the assumption, because their limbic brain is telling them, hey, this is not going to end well. One of us has to leave. One of us has to get hurt. This is going to be a fight, whatever is saying. And all we're trying to do is do some limbic retraining and say, actually, when we sit down with some ground rules and we walk through a scenario, we can figure it out. One person playing their stereo too loud in the room is not grounds for someone having to leave the house. We can figure out a solution to this. One person leaving the light on is not going to end things. One person who snores or who doesn't wash enough or whatever the thing is, that empties the dishwasher from the back instead of from the front. Whatever the issue is, those are not the issues, but if we can work through them, then those can become really amazing launching pads for people to learn how to actually do conflict. And the mediation process is the way to do that. So again, Carmen said something really powerful a few minutes ago, and that part of what we're trying to do with our residents is help them learn to trust again. And breaches in trust are what have led so often to addictive behavior to begin with. And so trust is this sort of key currency in helping people step back into relationship that is healing. Relationship is almost always the thing that has gone wrong in someone's story. And so it's only through experiences in positive relationship that they'll be able to step into something very different and better. So healing comes through relationship, just like damage and hurt came through relationship. And so mediation is this process that we can do to do that. So I don't have time to do that here. We have presented on this mediation topic in past conferences and so on, and maybe we'll do that again at some point. But it's a great skill set. And if you don't know much about it, it'd be a great way to invest some professional development time and resource. Right, now let's talk about contracts if we get to that place.
We have a behavior contract, which I alluded to earlier. Things we've learned about contracts, and I know that need to leave some time for Q&A here at the end, is that they need to be specific, and they need to be time bound, and they need to be fair. So if the self-discovery doesn't work and we're still having some of the same issues, the behavior contract should be very specific about what you're asking to have changed. And then it should be time bound. So leaving it open-ended is really unfair. So this person just feels like they've got this thing that's hanging over them, and I'm being monitored, and everything I'm doing is going to possibly be one step towards me not being able to stay here anymore. So they really need to be fair, and it needs to be something that the participant is engaging in with you. Does this feel like something that you can agree to? But they also do need to understand that it is a contract, and we are asking you to say, the ball's really in your court now. We can do another self-discovery if you think that'll be helpful. We're here to help you. How can we support you so that you can have success here? But the ball is really in your court. And in order for us to continue on and everybody to function and live well together, these are the things that we're asking you to take a look at and turn around. We're here to help you with it. I don't think that a behavior contract should be any more than a few weeks. I think that any more than that is too long, but you also want to give enough time for people to be able to respond, right? And this may be the time when you're assessing if this is a mental health thing, to where this person is just not able to turn that behavior around, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward, and we're happy to share that document as well. That we didn't share that with the folks at Fletcher, but we're happy to share that one as well. I'm sure it could be sent out afterwards. One thing I wanted to say before we move into closing, when Alan and I were at the NAR conference last year, I was in a really good, I don't know if Alan attended it, but I was in this session that was talking about different types of having to remove folks and making hard decisions and ethical decision making in recovery homes. And one of the things that was kind of a takeaway for us that our staff actually sat down and did is we worked on a document that was organizational values for decision making, for ethical decision making. And so we went through and said, what are our organizational values? What are the things that we hold fast to here? And how do those things shape the decisions that we make when it comes down to hard decisions with the people that we're serving? And it was a really good exercise for us to go through. And it's something that that we're using all the time now. But one of the questions that was asked at the conference was, am I willing to document the decision that I made about this person living in my home? Am I willing to document this? And would I be willing to share this decision that was made with their family? So those are kind of like the guardrails, if you will, when we're having to make these decisions. And I think that sometimes it will change how we handle these things, right? It's making us accountable for what we say it is that we're here to do.
I think one more thing I'll pile onto that if I can is some of the decisions we make, especially as they relate to mental health issues, are about level of care. And I don't know that we use that language very much here, but one fundamental question and best time to answer the level of care question is when you're deciding whether or not to bring someone into your home. And if you have the right level of care, that means that you have the support that a person needs. If a person comes and is super complex and has all kind of mental health challenges, and you don't have a lot of time and energy or staffing to walk alongside that person, it'd probably be good not to take them in. And I know a number of us are in a situation where there aren't a lot of other places out there for folks, but we can really do harm to them and be kind of another kind of a link in their chain of failures if we bring someone in who really we shouldn't have. And so the best time to make that level of care determination is up front. But sometimes along the way we don't know, and so we bring somebody in and we try to work with them as best we can. And ultimately, it could be that they just need a higher level of care than what we have to offer. And again, we don't throw that around lightly. It's a really weighty kind of decision. But as Carmen said before, it would be awesome if it makes the ethical thing to do is then to help them find that level of care somewhere else instead of just abandoning them. So we're taking on quite a commitment when we bring somebody in, then that's part of it. Carmen, are we ready to open up for any questions that folks have? And I'll leave it to the Fletcher folks about how you want to do that.
Yeah.
Carmen, Alan, thank you so much. There's so much interest and clearly a need for this. And we spoke a few minutes before the webinar, and I'm working with some operators right now who are really struggling with this topic. So I can't tell you how timely it is and appreciated. I'm just going to jump right in with some questions if that's okay. Okay. So John asked if you were dealing with a client that was actively using meth that is displaying mental health concerns, but is not an immediate risk to themselves or others, what are some ways to get them to see their use itself as destructive and hopefully to get them started on medications?
Go first, Carmen.
Yeah, so clarification, that was the first part that they're actively using meth?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I would say, I mean, from my vantage point, if somebody were actively using meth in one of our homes, it would be because that they had relapsed. So we were running abstinence-based recovery homes. That I just wanted to clarify that first before we got further into the question. And then can you say the rest of it again?
Sure. Sorry. So that they were actively using meth and displaying mental health concerns, but is not an immediate risk to themselves or others. What are some ways to get them to see their use itself is destructive and hopefully get them started on medications? So I guess when you know somebody started using in the house, how to talk to them when they maybe don't even recognize or willing to admit that their use is destructive.
Do you want to just jump real quick into Alan about just that?
Yeah. I think obviously, so our homes are absence based, and so we would say that's probably a place where that person would need a higher level of care, and probably a place like a treatment center and so on where they're actually working on that. But obviously, willingness is super important, and you can't impose willingness on somebody. I think that whole question of what it's going to take, what kind of factors in a person's life need to be in place before where things are bad enough or hard enough to where they're willing to make a change. If it's comfortable, people will kind of stay where they are. And that's hard. I'm not a big proponent of tough love approaches. And I think that's a whole other conversation, but ultimately we can't manipulate somebody into that kind of decision making. I think this kind of opens the door to a whole other kind of conversation around permanent supportive housing and housing first models. And this is the question that they're asking all the time. Boy, we have these residents they're using. We want to see them move into recovery. How do we do that? That is really hard because we've created essentially a space where things are pretty comfortable and they don't really have to. There's no crisis that's causing them to need to rethink their choices. And as you say, if they don't perceive that they're doing harm to others, I would argue that they probably are doing harm to themselves in the long run, and that they're pushing back some healing that could happen in their stories that would allow them to do things like work and have successful relationships and all of that. So there may not be immediate evident harm, but there's absolutely harm happening there. Anyway, we could talk a long time about that. I had to glad to do that offline, but yeah.
Thanks, Alan and Carmen. I know that's a tough one because it's so situational too. And when it got to that point for us, when I was working in housing, we were really looking to successfully transfer them to a more appropriate level of care.
Mhm. Yeah. You go to the next slide. I think our contact information is on there just in case. I guess we'll find out here. I forget.
Yes, I believe it is. Thanks, Alan.
You can click through to there. Keep going. Questions. I think maybe one more. Oh, maybe not. Okay.
Oh,
all right. Well,
I thought
we
that
can
was
get
there
that to
too.
you if you need it. But okay. Any other questions? Glad to.
Yeah, there's a few actually. So Rusty says, I've been working with the men. I've been working with men. They will mention almost in passing some grief or trauma and then go right back to talking about about their job and doing well, like it doesn't affect them. Aside from talking and poking around and seeing if they want to speak on it, men seem to hide their behavior and mental health struggles. Any thoughts on how to address it?
For me, I think it's about permission giving. It's about creating environments where people can talk about those things and maybe having someone who's a little farther along model what that even looks like in a conversation. So that's the power of peers, where a peer who has kind of figured out that really is worth diving into. And so some time spent in house meetings or other spaces where someone can actually share, so that there's a resident who's really experienced some good things in grief counseling maybe, or in just talk therapy, or they just are willing to talk about or answer the question, hey John, how's it going with the loss of your dad last year? You talked about earlier, and make sure you got permission to do that, and give them the opportunity to model for newer residents what it's like to have that conversation. I think they learn most from each other. I don't think you can make somebody just like making them stop using. I don't think you can do that. I think it's about creating an environment where that is safe and encouraged, and then let people try it out.
Love that. Love the permission aspect. And
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead, Carmen.
sorry,
No,
Carmen.
go ahead, Erica.
I was just going to say there's so many good questions. I wish we could have done a 2-hour special series on this. But Carmen, go ahead and finish your thought too.
Yeah, I just wonder about, and I noticed too, and especially when people have gone through a lot and just kind of that off the cuff, like, oh, and then this thing happened, and then they just, go on to this. It's like, this has been life, right? This is just par for the course. But it also feels like when someone has shared that little tidbit, that it's totally worth coming to the circling back around. And hey, I'm just wondering if there's a time that you'd like to talk a little bit more about that, and just that safe space, making time for somebody. I think there's a great value in the follow-up conversation with people, just to say that, what you shared actually is really important. I would love to talk about that some more with you sometime, if that's something that you're open to.
That's a great seg. I'm a firm believer. It's not what you say, it's how you say it, and inviting them, getting permission, asking, very valuable advice. Leah asked, can you tell me more about this Genesis process? I was also interested in this. It caught my ear.
Sure.
Yeah.
You want me to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Genesis it's a faith-based process. So it may not be for everybody, but it sort of combines some really good kind of what we know about brain science, what we know about some life skills that people in early recovery need to be thinking about. Conflict resolution is a part of it, dealing with desires, resentments, and fears. It's a systematic, it's a kind of a one-on-one workbook. There's also a group version of it, but the one-on-one workbook has 10 processes in it. And it's all about kind of getting people to look back at their story so they can learn from it, and then being able to make a relapse prevention plan moving forward. So to be able to say, from my past relapses, I've learned that these things are the things that trigger me. This is what my pattern looks like. This is what my behavior starts to look like. And then the climax of the process is inviting a few other people into a circle with them at the end, where they actually talk about what their desire to stay in recovery and what relapse would look like for them, and giving people permission to ask them questions when they see that when they're starting to exhibit some of those kinds of behaviors. And so the whole thing is about moving from isolation into community in a kind of in this organized way. And it does take some training to be a facilitator, a one-on-one coach, but that's available in various spots around the country. There's some online version of that one of our colleagues does. And then there's a local, my wife and I happen to facilitate coach training, and that happens, we try to do that around once a year here in the Northwest. So if you want to come visit us, we can talk about that. But,
Oh, thank you
Carmen,
so much.
anything else you throw in about Genesis? I don't want to.
It's genesisprocess.org is where you can find all the different
Okay, I found the right
books.
one.
There's tons of videos on YouTube of Michael Dye, who is the creator and author of the Genesis Process. So if you looked at Michael Dye, D-Y-E, unfortunately he's no longer with us, but lots of really great stuff on YouTube as well. There's a inner healing aspect to Genesis as well that's at the very beginning of starting to work through and deal with some of these foundational false belief systems that are lurking in the limbic brain that are very resistant to information. So we talked about that earlier, that there's a part of the brain that learns through experience, and there's a part of the brain that learns through our prefrontal cortex. It's two completely different areas. And so some of that inner healing on those foundational false belief systems that are the foundation that are carrying people through all these different places in life, and getting some healing around that area and getting a new, true, healthy belief system is foundational in the Genesis process, and it's really powerful. The other tool that's in Genesis that Alan was alluding to is the faster scale, and it's really like nothing else that we've ever seen. And it's getting people dialed into their subconscious pre-relapse behaviors, and really a deep dive into that. It's all very practical, nuts and bolts, competent, grace-based, accountable, relationship-based processes, and they just work. They're very, very good.
Oh, I'm so excited. What a wonderful description, Carmen. And I found the right website. It is in the chat. We are a little over time. I would love to invite you all back. And I think there will also be a lot of requests. If you do have a template or something for the behavior contract, I know new operators who are just starting out and really struggling through this situation right now that would benefit. And I just want to thank you all so much. I can't tell you, I've been in the field a long time and I learned so much today. So thank you sincerely. This was wonderful. And for all of you who were not able to download, I'm going to do my best. I wasn't able to capture all the email addresses. The handout, the self-discovery, will be on our website next week. I'm going to try to work with Michelle to see if we can do a follow-up email to every single attendee and get that out. So I will do my best, but if not, please reach out to us at Fletcher Group. Try to get it on our website next week, worst case scenario, but I will try to get that out to you all. Carmen, Alan, thank you so much. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. And again, we invite you back. So cover any topic you want. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you so much.
Great to be with you all.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye. Thanks.